Good evening, everybody. So, welcome to English Without Borders Network. So, we are very happy to continue our Thursday series of English Without Borders webinars. And today, we are very happy to host again Linda Wesley, who will be talking about developing strong readers, moving beyond oral reading. And last time, we really enjoyed a great webinar conducted by Linda. And just to remind you some information about Linda, Linda has an MA and has more than 30 years of experience in foreign language education as a K-12 adult education, junior college, and university teacher. She is now the owner operator of Linda Teaches English, a private business that provides individual and small group instruction, as well as daily Instagram lessons to students around the world. And additionally, she facilitates teacher training courses for English as a second foreign language teacher. In recent years, she has also delivered on-site and or virtual teacher training and consulting in Bolivia, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Peru, Saudi Arabia, and South Korea. Melinda holds an advanced degree in teaching English as a second language from Western Kentucky University in the United States. So, Linda, thank you very much for joining and for uh, being a part of the English Without Borders Network. And we are very happy to have you and to host you today. And just before we get started, I would like to kindly remind our participants on Facebook and also on Zoom that we are still accepting applications for Innovative Teacher Awards 2021. Please be aware that only 6 weeks left till the deadline, which is July 1st. And please hurry up and send us your application for this very significant and the first ever in Tajikistan award, which will be celebrating English teachers in Tajikistan and will be done during the English Without Borders National Conference in the fall 2021. So thank you very much. And now I'm giving the floor to our wonderful Linda. Linda, now the floor is yours. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to have a second opportunity to speak to this group. So I really appreciate this second invitation. I will go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah? Okay, great. So today's presentation is Developing Strong Readers in the EFL Classroom, Moving Beyond Oral Reading. All right, so we'll start with my introduction. For those of you who were at the last webinar, this will be very similar, but I'm hoping that that I can introduce myself again, and maybe there are a few people that are new. So again, my name is Linda Wesley. I am from the United States, and more specifically, I'm from the state of Tennessee. And as I mentioned in the last webinar, Tennessee is usually famous for two things. The first one is country music, as you can see with the guitar and the cowboy boots and often a cowboy hat. And the second thing is Jack Daniel's whiskey. So sometimes if people aren't familiar with country music, they do recognize the Jack Daniel's bottle. So both of these are about 1 to 2 hours from my home here in Tennessee. And just very briefly, for your introduction, if in the Facebook chat or in the Zoom chat, if you could write the following, your name, you can just use your first name, the number of years you have been teaching, and where you're from. So as an example, in the chat, I would write Linda, 33 years, Tennessee, USA. So if we can take a moment and see if anybody puts that in the chat. And Nasiba, maybe you can let me know if some people.
Yeah, sure. Yes. As soon I'm just tracking the chat, and yeah, I'll be able to see.
Okay, great.
Okay, Gulnoro, 16 years teaching experience, Tajikistan. Nasiba, like 21 years of teaching experience.
Wow.
And now out of that, like 21 years of working experience, and out of that, like 15 years of teaching experience.
All right. So we have some very experienced teachers here today.
Yes. We also have Firuz. Firuz is 40 years old and over 10 years teaching experience from Tajikistan.
Wow.
Parvina Sodiqova, she's from Tajikistan, and I guess like she probably has like 10 plus
That's
teaching
great.
years experience. Oh, Judy Elliott, 40 years from New Jersey.
Wow.
So you know Judy, yes? She's one of the,
No.
again, like, yeah. So as a member of English Without Borders, she has some webinar with us
Oh,
like a
wonderful.
couple months ago, yeah. And she's kind of a very experienced and very devoted teacher, and she is already done several very huge projects for developing teaching capacity around the globe. And
Great.
yes, you can get in touch with her. And she's also English language fellow from the U.S. Department of State.
Well, Judy, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, we'll keep moving on, but as you come in, please take the time to make your introduction. And I'm just going to jump in, and while we're still in the chat, I would like you to think for a moment about the qualities of a good reader. So if someone comes to your classroom and looks around, how do you describe a good reader in your classroom? What are some of the characteristics? You could put a sentence, you could put just a few words. If you can put those comments over in the chat for how you describe a good reader. Everybody's thinking right now. Just some of the first words. All right, attentive and critical reader. That's great. Answering complicated questions. Excellent. Yeah, everybody who's participating, you can just throw in one or two words. Good comprehension skills. Reading between the lines. Later, you'll hear me use the words making inferences, another way to say reading between the lines. I can tell that we have a very experienced group of teachers today, because often when I ask this question, skimming and scanning abilities, someone who is focused, great. Often when I ask this question, people talk about the oral reading aspect, that they can pronounce the words well, that they are very clear when they say those. And so that's what I wanted to focus on today. As teachers of reading, whether that be in a specific reading course or as when reading is part of an integrated skills course, knows the vocabulary, excellent. We have to juggle our job as reading teachers, because we do need to think about teaching the sounds, the different sounds, or sometimes we refer to this as phonics, meaning somebody mentioned vocabulary. Niso says putting the text into a larger context. Yes, very much. Syntax, the order of words in a sentence. word parts, the prefixes, the suffixes, strategies, sequencing, skimming, scanning, all of these different things. So like this clown here, we are constantly juggling all of those responsibilities to be good reading teachers. But often what I see in a lot of classrooms is too much attention to the sounds, too much attention to the oral reading. And so what I would like to do today is talk about what I call, well, other people call too, word callers. So word callers, and you know these students in your class, word callers are the students who can read something absolutely beautifully. Every word that they pronounce is exactly correct or very close. And they just seem like the best readers in the classroom. And let's talk about two of the things that they do well. First, they read orally with accuracy and fluency. All right, as we just mentioned. Second, they answer easy, obvious questions. All right, not the questions that some of you are talking about where they're reading between the lines and things like that. So if we were together in the same room, one of the things that I like to do is use an example. In this case, I'll use an example from Spanish. And I asked somebody in the room who does not speak Spanish to read this. But since we're on Facebook Live and Zoom today, I can do this myself. So just follow along. Mi nombre es Sanjita. Tengo 11 años. Vivo en Nueva Delhi, India, con mi padre, madre, 2 hermanos y 3 hermanas. Mis abuelos también viven con nosotros. En la India, la familia es muy importante. Es común tener abuelos, tías, tíos y o primos viviendo en la misma casa. Now, usually at this point, we all clap and applaud the reader of that. And I say, oh, what a magnificent reader you are. You read so beautifully. And then I ask a few questions, and this goes back to the easy and obvious questions. For example, and we'll use the chat for this. How old is Sanjita? Just put your answer in the chat very quickly. How old is Sanjita? Yes, I see one response. Yes, yes. I'm seeing more responses come in. This is what I mean by an easy, obvious question, because when we look at this reading, there's only one number. All right. And so it's a pretty good guess that Sanjita is 11 years old. Let's ask another easy, obvious question. Where does Sanjita live? Again, you can use the chat. Yep. And I'm seeing those answers roll in. And again, that's one of those easy, obvious, questions, because we can look over here, we can see the name of a country that we recognize. We can see that it uses capital letters, but it's not the first word of the sentence. So we have a pretty good idea that that is the correct answer. And I'll just ask one more question. Is family important in India? That's just a yes or no question. Is family important in India? And I'm seeing those answers come in. Yes, 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 yes. And here we can look at this sentence right here. En la India, la familia es muy importante. Here we can use the cognates. All right. Familia, family, they look very similar. Is, they look similar. Importante, important, they look similar. So, and I can also use my prior knowledge and think, yeah, I think family is very important in India. So, word callers can read this beautifully and can answer easy, obvious questions. But then if I go deeper and say, who does Sanjita live with? That one might not be so easy, all right, if you didn't speak the language. Who is it common to also have live in the same house? That one might not be so easy because we don't have numerals, we don't have capital letters, we don't have cognates, all those things that we can easily use as clues. So this is just a small example of the kinds of things that word callers can do well. But let's look at some of the challenges that word callers have. Word callers can struggle with understanding words with multiple meanings. So for example, if I use the word club, am I talking about a group of people who meet after school? Am I talking about a bar with dancing and alcohol? Am I talking about a big stick that somebody can hit with? Those are all meanings of the word club. And so word callers can struggle with understanding those multiple meanings, even though they can accurately pronounce club. Another struggle they have is summarizing. Okay, you just read this story beautifully. Now, in your own words, can you give me a summary of what you just read? This is often a very big struggle for students who are just word callers. Synthesizing more than one source. For those of you familiar with, for example, the TOEFL, one of the things on the TOEFL IBT is that students read one thing and listen to another, and then they have to synthesize those two sources together. That can be very difficult. Making inferences, somebody mentioned reading between the lines in the chat. That can be very, very difficult for a student who is just a word caller. And elaborating on answers. When a teacher says, tell me more, can you explain how you got that answer? Why do you think that's true? These can all be significant challenges for a student who is just a word caller. Now, before I continue, let me say that being a good word caller is an important skill. We do want students with very good pronunciation. We do want students who could be understood well when they're reading something, but we don't want to make the mistake of thinking that word calling alone equals comprehension. And so I found this quote several years ago from Word Callers Small Group and One-to-One Interventions for Children Who Read but Don't Comprehend. This source is down here at the bottom of the slide by Kelly Cartwright. She said that word callers are often so focused on letters and decoding that their minds don't knit together the meaning of the words they are reading. All right. And I have to admit, even as a native English speaker, sometimes I can read something orally and not think about the comprehension because I'm just working on those letters and the decoding and not knitting it all together. For those of you who maybe knit, you know exactly what I mean here. So if we know that word calling isn't the most important thing by itself, why do so many teachers focus so much on word calling? So this is the next thing I would like you to put in the chat. Now, maybe you are a teacher who does not just focus on word calling. Maybe you are a teacher who does work on all those other skills, but you probably have seen some classrooms where there's a lot of emphasis on word calling. Could you put a few ideas in the chat of why you think some teachers focus so much on word calling? I'll just take a moment. I'll have my little sip of tea while we wait for some answers in the chat, and Nasiba can let me know if there's any in the Facebook group.
Yes. Okay.
Or maybe I have an audience of teachers who don't do that. All right, Parvina is at.
Yes.
Oh, I pulled up the
Okay.
chat. Okay,
Yes.
again, when I say word calling, I mean the ability to say the words. So we're talking about oral reading. They can call the words. If I go back to the example in Spanish, most of you could probably read this and have pretty good pronunciation, but you might not understand any of the words. So word calling is when you're able to pronounce the words that you read, but not have much comprehension. So I hope that helps as another definition. All right. Well, I'll keep moving. Okay, so to just make students to expose to the test, to the text, yes, that's true. You want students to have some exposure to that text and be able to hear it. And you know, something about silent reading is it's invisible. The teacher can't see it. But when we listen to students read orally, we can hear it and we can see it a little bit. Audio learners learn better by hearing, okay? Push their critical thinking skills. Let's see if anybody else. What I often see and often hear in previous webinars or things is, this is one quote a teacher gave me. My administrator is impressed when he hears my students read. He says I must be a good teacher. So this teacher admitted that when she has her students read orally, that it's very impressive. All right. The administrator thinks, she's a great teacher. I see another one, a stream of familiar words assists many students to get the gist. All right, you're right. Another teacher gave me this comment. I don't feel comfortable teaching comprehension, but I feel very comfortable with pronunciation. And another teacher said, I thought this teacher was very honest. When I have everyone in the class read, the other students have to be quiet. I can control my classroom. So what I have found is when some teachers focus so much on the oral reading, not the comprehension, many of them will say, it's part of my classroom management. It's how I keep the students' attention, because one student reads and then the next student reads and then the next student reads, but everyone is careful. Again, maybe this isn't happening in your classrooms. I hope not, but you may have seen it before. So today what I want to focus on is some strategies for moving beyond oral reading. And again, oral reading is also the same thing as word calling. So you will hear me say the same strategy again and again and again. Recycle and interact with the text. This is the best strategy for moving beyond oral reading. The next one, recycle and interact with the text. The next one, recycle and interact with the text. So you get the idea that I feel very strongly about recycling and interacting with the text. For those of you not familiar, this word recycle means to use the same material again and again and again. Just as we might recycle paper and use it again for another purpose, we can recycle vocabulary, we can recycle parts of stories and use them again and again. Because too often we introduce students to the vocabulary and then we make it their responsibility to learn the vocabulary. But in the classroom, we need to create multiple opportunities to recycle that vocabulary and interact with the text. Just as when you have a conversation with another person, you interact, we need to interact with the text and we need to give students an opportunity to interact with it. Now, sometimes students will say, teacher, we did this story yesterday. So part of it is convincing the students that yes, but to really learn it, to really get the vocabulary and the information in our heads, we have to recycle and interact with the text as much as possible. So today, I would like to take a very famous American children's story. This one is called The Very Hungry Caterpillar, if you can see it. And I would like to use it as an example of something that you can recycle and interact with regularly. The reason I chose this book is this is a very short, you can see how thin it is. It's a very short children's book. And I don't know if we have teachers of young learners, teachers of middle school, teachers of adults. I think we have a lot of different teachers of different age groups. So I wanted to show you that even a small book like this, that only takes a few minutes, maybe 3 minutes to read, can give us so many opportunities to recycle and interact. And so again, this is also an opportunity to introduce you to this very famous piece of American children's literature, if you're not already familiar with it. It's one of the many books by the author Eric Carle, who sadly just died a few months ago. In the chat, just give me a yes if you're familiar with Eric Carle or The Very Hungry Caterpillar. His books have been translated into so many languages. And so I'm curious about if you know Eric Carle and The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Do I see any yeses on that? If not, I will take it as an opportunity to introduce you to him and his books. And so, okay, I see a no. All right, well, welcome to Eric Carle. Eric Carle was the writer of dozens and dozens and dozens of children's books. Some of the most famous ones, maybe you've seen Brown Bear, What Do You See? And notice that story has a rhythm. Brown Bear, what do you see? And then in the book, it says something like, I see a yellow bird looking at me. Yellow bird, what do you see? I see a gray fox looking at me. And so these are books that can help young learners learn to read and learn better comprehension, because they are what we call predictable reading. Even if we don't, I love that. Oh, I've read that book to my son, but I didn't know the author. That often happens. Even if the student can't read yet, even if the child is just 2 or 3 years old, they can predict what's coming and say, yes, I see a yellow bird looking at me. Judith says, what do you say to the teacher who says, I have too much material and topics to cover, I don't have time? And then she says, I'm bringing copies of this book. All right, great. I say that you can bring this in little, even if you have 5 minutes. And many times teachers say, I don't even have 5 minutes. And I say, I bet you do, because many times we lose time at the beginning of class when we're checking attendance, or we lose time at the beginning of class when students are getting their books out. That's another presentation we could do. Nasiva, I have a presentation about how to find time in your class. So I won't talk too much about that now, but I think you can find it and you can use it in just little short pieces. That way the students don't get bored. All right. And you have that opportunity to recycle and interact with the text. And so maybe some of you can take a picture of this screen, or I will be sharing the PowerPoint, but these are some of the most famous books by him. And you'll notice here even Brown Bear, what do you see? And he also wrote down here in the bottom corner, Polar Bear, what do you hear? Which follows that same rhythm. All right. Oh, my nephew used to sing this song. That's great. And just to share this book with you again, almost all of Eric Carle's books are interactive. So for example, if you look here, you will see a real hole in the book, because in this story, a little caterpillar starts, and he's a very hungry caterpillar. So each day, for example, he eats through one apple. It's a great way to teach prepositions. On Tuesday, he eats through 2 pears, 3 plums, 4 strawberries, 5 oranges, and the children have an opportunity to put their fingers in the book. So let me just give you some examples of all the ways that I have recycled and interacted with this book. And I should say, not all the ways, just some of the ways. And I also want to point out that these are activities that I do with adult students. Now, right there, people say, you can't use children's books with adults. Well, you can if you do it the right way. The way I introduce these books to adults as parts of American culture. Because if I show this book to an American, they can immediately say, Brown Bear, what do you see? And so when I use these with adult learners, I ask them to be a reviewer, review this book. Would this be a good book for your child or your grandchild or your little brother or your niece or nephew? So it's a great way to work with adults. With just the vocabulary, I usually start with words and pictures together. So in that 5 minutes that you might find in your class, you could introduce the words and the pictures together. For example, here we have moon, egg, leaf, sun, caterpillar. These are just a few of the picture words that are going to be very important in this book. All right. And so maybe the first day I introduce those, ask the student to study those. Now, again, a word caller will say, I can read that, sun, leaf, moon, caterpillar, because they have mastered those sounds. The next day, I might say, okay, let's try this. I will show them the word, ask them to pronounce it, and they'll say moon. And I'll say, okay, now, what picture do you see in your head? And oftentimes a student will realize at that moment, I don't have a picture in my head. I can say the word, but I don't have a picture. So this helps a lot of students realize at any age that just because I can say the word does not mean I have the picture of the word in my head. All right. And so that might be the second day in those 5 minutes. And then on the third day, we can get even more difficult, maybe. I can show the picture and ask, what is that? And if they know it, moon, that still doesn't mean they can read it. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But this is an opportunity to introduce the spelling. All right, what is this? Moon, how do you spell it? M-O-O-N. So right here, I have 3 different days in 3 different classes of introducing the vocabulary, because I want the vocabulary to become very, very natural. I may have mentioned this last time that I want students to own vocabulary. I don't want them to rent vocabulary, because when they rent the vocabulary, they have to return it. And that's often what we do before a test. We rent the vocabulary, but we don't own it. It disappears immediately. As we progress with the story, doing a lot of different activities, I might mix the pictures in with the function words. All right. And just take out some of the words that they can just word call and put in the picture. The one that's always the most popular, if you're familiar with this book, is when a student can read this whole page. On Saturday, he ate through 1 piece of chocolate cake. Now I'm pretending that you are saying this right now. 1 ice cream cone, 1 pickle, 1 slice of Swiss cheese, 1 slice of salami, 1 lollipop, 1 piece of cherry pie, 1 sausage, 1 cupcake, and 1 slice of watermelon. That student always gets a lot of applause, because that is a lot of vocabulary to know. Even if you're working with older students, one of the things on, again, I'll mention the TOEFL test in the reading section, is pronoun reference. And so this is a great way to introduce the concept of pronoun reference by only having 1 pronoun in this story. So we can start with, in the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. One Sunday morning, the warm sun came up, and pop, out of the egg came a tiny and very hungry caterpillar. He started to look for some food. Class, who is he? The caterpillar. On Friday, he ate through 5 oranges. Who is he? The caterpillar. But he was still hungry. And this is a great way to introduce it with just 1 pronoun, so that they get the idea of pronoun references before we start including it and they and some of the more complicated pronouns. If you're teaching grammar, this is a great book to use with past tense verbs. So for example, on the right, I just pulled out a few, and we might maybe have the list of irregular verbs. We just started studying. We did the simple past tense with ed, and then we also have our irregular verbs. And so I might ask lay, past tense verb, regular or irregular? Irregular, what's the base form? Came, past tense verb, regular or irregular? Irregular. What's the base form? Come. And you notice you can go through here. You can introduce the verbs. You can ask them to identify the verbs, to find them on their own. And again, it's a fun text to work with, but still get those ideas across of how to do this before you get to the more complicated text. And even in children's stories, I don't think I've ever had a student who knew the word nibbled. And even for you, nibble might be a new verb. Nibble is something a rabbit or a caterpillar does, or even a human, when we eat something with little tiny, tiny bites. Sequencing, all right, that's putting a story in order. One thing I will do is just take the story and cut it into different pieces. And so, for example, this is a great story to do that with. I'm going to minimize this for a minute, because I could ask students, even in an online class, to say, okay, what happened first? Well, here I have on Monday, then I have on Tuesday. I think Saturday is later. I should put Wednesday after Tuesday. And so there are some different elements here that work for sequencing. And again, you might put these in the chat, but in the interest of time, I'll say this is a great way to tell them to use the clues of the days of the week: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. All right. Or the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are great ways to introduce the idea of sequencing. Let me go back to the full screen now. But we also don't want to forget the word calling and the pronunciation. And so there are also activities we can do to pull all this together. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Reader's Theater. You can put in the chat if you're familiar with that. Reader's Theater is when you take a story and you create different parts, much like a play. So let me show you this example. This is taking the Very Hungry Caterpillar and making it into a little drama. Now, some people say, oh, it's a play. Actually, it's not, because with a play, the students have to memorize their lines. They have to memorize the words. In Reader's Theater, the students do not memorize the words. The students have the paper, all right? So they don't have to memorize, but this gives us an opportunity to put pronunciation, word calling, and comprehension together. And so, for example, the narrator might say, in the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf. Another student might be doing the actions of that. Narrator 2, a little egg, a little egg. Narrator 1, one Sunday morning, the sun came up. And while the student is reading that, he is making the actions of the sun came up. Then the caterpillar says, I'm very, very hungry. I want to eat. And notice here, stress on very, very hungry. So this gives us an opportunity to put that pronunciation and comprehension together. Because here, when the sun came up, the student needs to be demonstrating that. Again, if we were together in a room face to face, we would do this activity, because I have seen so many teachers do this so beautifully and so dramatically. It's a lot of fun, because here you notice the apple is very scared. Oh no, don't eat me. And in the book, we have 1 apple, 2 pears, 3 plums. And so often what you can do with Reader's Theater is, after you do it one time, you can ask the students to write another part. So maybe there's another section of Reader's Theater with the 5 oranges. Just some ideas. So in conclusion, oh good, I'm right on time. If we want to develop strong readers, we must move beyond oral reading. And again, it sounds like with this audience today, we already have a lot of teachers who are moving beyond oral reading. But if you're not, these are just some ideas to be able to do that. Or if you're working with some new teachers, maybe you're a teacher trainer, or maybe you work in a school with an administrator who puts a lot of emphasis on oral reading. Maybe this can give you some information to share with that administrator about the importance of putting it all together. All right, I'll share my contact information again very quickly. My name is Linda Wesley. The easiest and quickest way to find me is on Instagram at Linda Teaches English, together as one word. You can send me a direct message there. I love communicating with teachers on Instagram. And I also post a daily lesson 6 days a week, just a short 1-minute lesson for teachers or to share with students. My email is lindawesley16@gmail.com. If you are on LinkedIn, the professional website, I'm Linda Wesley, and I'm hoping, as I mentioned before, I'm hoping very soon to have a YouTube channel. And so with that, we can go to Q&A.
Yeah, thank you very much, Linda, for such interesting presentation. Everyone who joined us on Facebook and also on Zoom, they got very interested, and we can see their comments in the chat box as well. So we have some questions here. So, and also I guess that, on Facebook, people are also asking some questions.
Okay.
So, yeah, the question is like, okay. All right. So how to cultivate reading in English habit among the students?
Yeah. I think one of the most important things that we need to do is is to have enough reading materials at the student's level so that the student can develop some fluency. Unfortunately, many times students think that they need to be reading something very difficult to be learning. And actually, I believe quite the opposite. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Stephen Krashen. Stephen Krashen is one of the fathers of English teaching, and he talks about the I+1, and I meaning input, +1 meaning just one step more difficult. And so, for example, he talks about series reading. In my case, when I was a young girl, Nancy Drew mysteries were so popular. I don't know if you're familiar with those. There were probably 50 or 100 Nancy Drew books. And in each book, she was a teenage girl who solved mysteries. Now, all of those books were on the same reading level. They weren't very difficult, but I read all of them. And so, and every time I read one, it became easier and easier because, again, I was recycling the vocabulary. The characters, many of the characters were the same, but then they introduced one or two new characters. So that's the I would be the characters I knew, and the one would be those new characters. And a lot of the same vocabulary, a lot of the same context. But every time I read one of those books, I could read it faster and faster and faster. And I remember when I started reading them, it might take me several days to read one. And then within a year, I could read one of those books in a day because my fluency was so built up. So I really encourage you, whenever possible, to try to develop a classroom library. And again, even with your older students, it's fine to have some of these books out there that may seem like children's books. But again, you can say, what do you think? Do you think your little brother or your little sister would like that? Or maybe you have a connection with an elementary school. This is another thing I've done. And ask your older students to learn how to read these books very well so that they can go to the elementary kindergarten class and read the books to the children. That's a real audience that they can read to. And so I could talk for days about this topic, but that would be my answer, is just find so many things and don't be worried that it's too easy, because again, you're recycling and you're developing that fluency, that ability to read faster. All right.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Very nice tips you are also sharing, like, how the students can do some volunteering work and also practice their English.
Yes.
Excellent,
yes.
Excellent. So we have more questions. Parvina is asking, do you have electronic version of the books you have shared? Maybe you can just send us the link. We can also share it with the audience so they will be able to download all those materials.
Yeah, I don't have, these books are not available electronically legally, but there are many YouTube videos that go through these. So I can send you a few links for those. Let me write that down so I don't forget. Yeah, if you do a Google search, you will find some of these, but you can also find these orally read. And I'll send a list. I have a list of I think it's the top 100 children's books that teachers recommend. All right.
Wow, that's excellent. It would be fantastic.
Send
Yeah,
that as
thank
another
you.
resource.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. We have another question from Bhakti Begim. She's saying, like, can we use your tips in extensive reading?
Yes, because I think that all of these things work together. And with the extensive reading, again, you are building that fluency. So every opportunity you have to interact with the text, reuse that vocabulary. And again, when you take these tips, you noticed that I went into grammar. When we talked about the verbs, I went into writing. So ideally, when I use, and not just children's literature, I've used Sherlock Holmes mysteries, I've used young adult books, I've used abridged books. Every opportunity you have to integrate the skills, when you stop and think about it, you can do pronunciation, you can do speaking, you can do reading, you can do writing, you can do grammar, you can do vocabulary, you can do listening. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda. We have a question from Gulnaro.
Okay.
She's asking, like, I love hearing about the approach owning vocabulary, not renting. Could you please elaborate more on that and how to apply this approach teaching adult learners?
Yeah, I've been teaching for 33 years, and a few years ago, that just came out of my mouth. My students were frustrated. They were getting ready for, some were taking the TOEFL, some were taking the IELTS, and they were just studying the vocabulary on the page. And but that's the only thing they knew how to do. And I said, but the problem is you don't own the vocabulary. And so the way to elaborate on that, I gave the example of, for many years, we might go to a video or a DVD store and we would rent a video, or we could go to the library and we could borrow a book. And so we did, we had it for that short time, but ultimately we had to return it. And so that's where I came up with the idea of, we want to find ways to help you own the vocabulary instead of renting it. And I always tell my students that I want to be able to call you at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're so asleep and ask you a question, and you answer because you own that information. The same thing is true even with my low level classes when we're introducing the alphabet. A lot of students think that they know the alphabet, and they don't. They start A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And I say, you don't own it. You don't own it. You're just renting it. And so this has really helped with a lot of my students to give them a visual. And now students will tell me, we have 20 new vocabulary words. I own 12 of them, but I'm still renting 8 of them. And sometimes they will say, can we practice these words more? Because when we practice, when we recycle and interact with it, it helps the student own it. Because also, the research says we need, I think it's 7 to 12 real interactions with vocabulary before we really own it. And so many times we just don't provide enough opportunities for that.
Yeah, just fantastic. We can listen to you for hours because you're sharing so wonderful tips By the way, like Judy Elliott, so as I mentioned earlier, yeah, she was a Fulbrighter and she's coming to Tajikistan this fall. And yeah, she was asking for your email, and we'll send her your email as well.
Yeah.
I
And I
think she
just
got
added it
interested.
again too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she
I
got
think Judy and I
interested in
should meet.
collaboration. Yes, definitely.
I'm
So
surprised we
yeah,
haven't met before, Judy.
yeah, yeah. Here at English Without Borders Network, connecting people as well.
See, even in the United
Yeah.
States.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much. And we have one more question.
Okay.
Yes. Uh, what else? So, how to better recycle the vocabulary? And what do you do by recycling the vocabulary? So you
I'm sorry.
mentioned like, can you hear me, Linda?
Oh, now I can.
Yes. Okay. So the question is, what do you mean by recycling vocabulary, and what do you do to recycle vocabularies?
Right. And so when I say recycle, just like when we recycle paper, we find other ways to use it. And then we find other ways to use it again. And so recycling vocabulary, again, if you think about going through my PowerPoint, if you want to relook at the presentation, even just with introducing the picture and the words together, that's one introduction. Then another way, the picture first, but no word. They have to create the word. That's recycling it again. It's taking the same information, using it in a different way. And then word first, picture second. That's a third way to recycle it. Putting the pictures and the words together in the story, that's a fourth way to recycle it. Even when we're doing the pronoun reference or looking for the past tense verb forms, that's another way to recycle it. And so it's just thinking every time that I, as the teacher, mindfully reuse that vocabulary. And so, you know, my students laugh at me, but that's great because I think laughter is an important part of learning, because I will find every possible way to recycle the vocabulary. So for example, when if I was working on this story with a very hungry caterpillar, remember the beginning words were something about, and the warm sun came up. And so maybe at the beginning of class, I might say, good morning, everybody. How are you today? This morning, I was drinking my tea as the warm sun came up. And I'll reuse that vocabulary in a different context. At first, they're like, what is she talking about? And then I'll start using some other vocabulary from the story. In Very Hungry Caterpillar, it says something about, and pop. Out came the tiny and very hungry caterpillar. So in class, I might say, the warm sun came up as I was drinking my tea and making toast, and then pop, out of my toaster came my warm toast. And so I just find silly ways to bring in that vocabulary. And then after a little time, the students will start doing that too. They'll walk into class and they'll say, oh, Linda, this morning I was sleeping when suddenly the warm sun came up. And what are we doing there too? We're not just using a single vocabulary word. They're stringing together the warm sun came up. And we're not saying, okay, come up is a phrasal verb and came is an irregular past tense of the phrasal verb. We're not using all of that teacher talk. They're stringing those words together by themselves. So back to your question, recycle just means to use it and reuse it and reuse it again and again.
Yeah. Tons of thanks, Linda. We have so many words of gratitude to you.
Oh,
like,
thank
you. The audience, like, the terms owning and renting, just kind of a new vocabulary for themselves as well.
Well, good. So, I hope they will own that vocabulary.
Definitely, definitely. So yeah, now the time is running. Yeah, and we are just almost around 7. And using this moment, I would like to give you our big thank you for your great job, Linda. So this time we were again very much impressed by so extensive teaching experience you are having and you are sharing with us, which makes like, you know, everybody feels so comfortable about like, you know, using your tips and also just how to motivate students and how to kind of boost their reading capacities, reading skills, and also just owning all the new vocabulary they have. Thank you very much.
Great.
And yes, and then using this moment, I would like to thank our active audience on Zoom and also on Facebook. Please stay tuned on us and also follow us on social media pages on Facebook and Instagram to get updates about English Without Borders Network, as well as our Thursday webinars. We are hosting them each Thursday at 6 p.m. Local time. Please join us. Thank you very much. Linda, have a great day ahead.
Thank you.
And see you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.